Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. New Vision International School 2019-2020 Social Studies Grade 8. Hello my dear students, how are you today? Welcome back to my Social Studies class. In our lesson today, we will use student book, activity book highlighter. So please prepare these things. Today we will study Lesson 4 in Unit 4, Global Trade Patterns. So, open your student book, please, page number 170. Before we start the lesson, here we have the objectives of this lesson. Learn more about the process of international trade, and the second one is identify some of the problems related to trade imbalances. And the last one is investigate the position of China and the USA in world trade. International trade. If you look at the labels on foodstuffs and clothing, you will see that the food and clothes we buy locally are often made in other countries. For example, olive oil may come from Syria or Italy. T-shirt may be made in China or Bangladesh or India. So very few countries in the world produce all the things they need. So they need to trade with other countries. They sell goods they can produce and buy the goods that other countries produce. International trade involves buying goods from other countries. When a country buys goods, these are called imports. But when they sell goods to another countries, we call these are exports. In this slide here we have some of the main reasons for international trade. Some countries do not grow certain foods, while others are unable to grow enough food to meet their needs. For example, Japan does not have enough arable land to grow food to feed its population. So it needs to import food. And we have another example here. United Kingdom does not have a suitable climate for growing foods like rice or bananas. So they need to import these kinds of products. And the second point is natural resources are not equally spread across the world. For example, Saudi Arabia has large reserves of oil, while countries like Canada or USA do not have enough oil to meet their domestic needs. Africa have a large reserve of gold, which they export to countries that do not have their own reserves. Point number 3. Some countries do not have manufacturing industries to produce all the modern goods they need themselves. So you have already seen that countries in Asia supply more than half of the world's electronic goods. Many countries do not make motor themselves, so they import cars from countries that do not. So here we have an example: Toyota from Japan or Hyundai from Korea and Mercedes-Benz and BMW from Germany. And the last point, number 4, some goods are imported because they are cheaper to manufacturing elsewhere. So clothing is a good example of this. Some countries in Asia, like China, produce clothes more cheaply than they can be made in other countries. Clothing stores may import items rather than try to produce them locally. Designers are have their design manufacturing in other countries. They then import the finished clothing back to their home countries to sell them. The balance of trade. What's the meaning of the balance of trade? The balance of trade is the difference between the cost of countries' imports and the income they earn from exports. So, if we want to calculate the balance of trade, we have to put income from export and we will get from them the cost of import, and the result will be the balance of trade. Government calculate their balance of trade. How does the government calculate their balance of trade? At the end of each year, government calculates their balance of trade. If the balance is positive, the country has a trade surplus. In other words, it earned more from exports than it paid for imports. But if the balance is negative, the country has a trade deficit. In other words, it earned less from exports than it paid for imports. As an example, here we have 5 countries, and we will see their balance of trade in the table. Through this table, we will see China and Saudi Arabia and Japan have a trade surplus. But United Kingdom and United States of America have a trade deficit. When a country has a deficit, the government will aim to increase exports by developing factories, paying incentives to farmers to produce more food products, or by finding new sources of mineral wealth. Sometimes the government may try to reduce the deficit by limiting imports to cut the cost. Trade imbalances. The present pattern of world trade gives the countries that export manufactured goods and services an advantage over the countries that export raw materials, primary products. Here we have a diagram. This diagram shows why this is the case. In this diagram, we will see country A, primary producer. It exports or sells their raw materials to another country, like country B, which has raw materials. But unfortunately, country B manufactures these raw materials and it imports these raw materials in a final shape to country A, but in double cost or triple cost. Trade imbalances are one of the most serious problems associated with world trade. And here we have a diagram summarizes the main patterns of world trade. Developed countries import mostly primary products and export mostly manufactured goods or services. And developing countries export mostly primary products and import mostly manufactured goods and services. But important primary products like minerals, copper, tin, gold, coal, aluminum, food, sugar, fruit, spices, grains, oils, cash crops, cocoa, tea, coffee, tobacco, rubber, fibers, cotton, and wools. Fairer trade. One of the effects of trade imbalance and the lower prices paid for raw materials is that the people who work in primary industries in developing countries do not always receive a fair payment for their products. As a result, they remain poor and have a poor quality of life. And the Fair Trade Organization aims to make sure that primary producers are paid a guaranteed and fair price for their products. The aim is to set fair prices that are not subject to global market fluctuations. So that in this picture here we have some examples of fair trade products. Some of the most common fair trade products are tea, coffee, sugar, chocolate, and cotton. By buying fair trade certified products, we can help to make the world a fairer place. China and the USA. China and the USA are the two largest contributors to world trade. So we will compare between them through this table in this slide and in the next slide's table. We will start here. Chinese import and export in 2011. This table is divided in two parts. The first one on the left, it shows the exports and the value. Through this table, we will take an example. China sold some goods to the USA and the value was $337.8 billion. And the top 5 products exported from China to the USA and the value: clothing and footwear, $52 billion. Computers and parts, $52 billion. Toys and bicycles, $29 billion. TV, $15 billion. Furniture, $13 billion. Trade imbalances. The present pattern of world trade gives the countries that export manufactured goods and services an advantage. over the countries that export raw materials, primary products. Here we have a diagram. This diagram shows why this is the case. In this diagram, we will see country A, primary producer. It exports or sells their raw materials to another country, like country B, which has raw material. In this slide, I want to remind you about your homework. It will be in activity book, page number 118 and 119. We will complete next week, inshallah. Have a nice day. Goodbye.